She worked at a small, cozy cafe on the corner of a busy street. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise, unlocking the cafe doors and turning on the warm lights that welcomed the early customers. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries always filled the air, and she moved through it with a quiet grace, arranging chairs and wiping tables until everything was perfect. She wore a simple apron over her plain clothes, her hair tied back, and a smile that seemed to belong to everyone and no one at the same time. She had been a waitress for years, and most people barely noticed her. She served them their coffee, cleared their plates, and smiled politely as they chatted about their lives, their meetings, and their daily routines. But no one knew the secret she carried with her every day, the thing that made her heart race and her hands tremble with excitement whenever she thought about it. Her life was ordinary, perhaps even simple. She lived in a small apartment above the cafe, a quiet place with just enough room for her bed, a tiny kitchen, and a piano that had belonged to her grandmother. The piano was old, with chipped keys and scratches on its wooden frame, but it was hers. Every evening, after the cafe had emptied and the dishes were washed, she would sit at the piano and let the music flow from her fingers. It was her escape, her secret world, and the only place where she felt completely alive. No one had heard her play outside of that small apartment. She didn't need an audience. The music was enough. But sometimes, late at night, she would imagine people listening, their eyes wide with surprise, their hearts moved by the melody she created. It was a beautiful dream, but she never thought it could be real. At the cafe, she moved through her day quietly, unnoticed. Regular customers greeted her politely, sometimes commenting on her efficiency or her polite smile, but they never lingered. Some people even assumed she was just a simple waitress, someone who only knew how to pour coffee and clear plates. She had learned not to mind. There was a kind of comfort in being invisible, in moving through the world without anyone expecting too much from you. She liked the rhythm of her life, mornings full of work, evenings full of music. It was predictable, safe, and, in its own way, comforting. Yet, deep inside, there was a longing she could not ignore. When she tapped her fingers on a table, when she hummed a tune while clearing dishes, she felt a spark of what her life could be. It was a secret passion, a small flame she protected carefully. She would sometimes catch herself daydreaming, imagining what it would feel like to play the piano in front of people who didn't know her. People who had no expectations, people who might be amazed by the music she could create. She never told anyone about these dreams. They were hers alone, delicate and fragile, like the quiet notes of a song floating in the air. On this particular morning, the cafe seemed just like any other. The sun had barely risen, casting soft golden light through the windows, and the aroma of coffee filled every corner. She moved through the tables, serving customers with her usual calm efficiency. She greeted the regulars by name, remembered their orders, and smiled politely at new faces. Most people didn't think much of her, and that was fine. She liked it that way. She liked being able to do her job without anyone expecting her to be anything more. She liked being able to live in her small, ordinary world where she could dream privately, but today something was different. The cafe manager, a kind but slightly frazzled man, came out from the back with a note in his hand. "Hey, everyone," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and worry. "We have a special event tonight. A musician was supposed to perform, but they canceled last minute. We need someone to play the piano." The staff exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise and concern in their eyes. No one spoke. Then the manager looked at her and smiled. Maybe you could play?" She froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She had never performed in front of anyone outside her small apartment. She wasn't ready. She wasn't sure she ever would be. Her hands itched to play, but her mind screamed that it was impossible. She shook her head quickly. "Oh, no. I couldn't," she said softly, but the manager didn't push. He just smiled encouragingly. "I think you can. You play so beautifully when no one's watching. Maybe tonight people need to hear that beauty." Her coworkers whispered among themselves, some teasing gently, others encouraging. "You should do it. You'd be amazing. Come on, it could be fun." She laughed nervously, but it was a nervous, fragile sound. The thought of being in front of a crowd, of people watching her every move, made her stomach twist. She had always believed her music belonged only to her. The idea of sharing it, of letting strangers hear it, felt both terrifying and thrilling. All day, she moved through her work with a distracted mind. Every time she poured coffee or wiped a table, she imagined herself sitting at the piano in the cafe's small corner, her fingers dancing across the keys, the music filling the room. She imagined the faces of the customers turning toward her, their surprise, their awe, their delight. Her heart raced at the thought. Could she really do it? Could she step out of the comfort of invisibility and let the world see her talent? When the evening came, the cafe began to fill with more people than usual. Some were curious about the promised music. Others were regulars who enjoyed a cozy evening with coffee and soft conversation. She moved among them, serving drinks, smiling politely, but her mind was elsewhere. Every laugh, every clink of a cup, every rustle of a chair made her feel the weight of what was about to happen. Finally, the manager approached her again. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. She walked toward the piano, her heart pounding like a drum. The room seemed to hold its breath as she sat down, the polished wood cool beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and let her hands rest on the keys. No one knew what to expect. The cafe was filled with ordinary people, quietly chatting, sipping their drinks. Some glanced at her with mild curiosity, some with amusement, assuming it would be a simple, pleasant performance. But as her fingers touched the first keys, the ordinary world of the cafe began to change. A soft, delicate melody filled the room, gentle and pure. The notes floated through the air, weaving around the tables and chairs, reaching the corners of the room and touching the hearts of everyone present. People stopped talking. People turned their heads. They listened. She played with a quiet confidence, her fingers moving with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had spent all day carrying trays and wiping tables. Each note was full of emotion, full of longing, full of life. The cafe, once ordinary, now felt like a concert hall, filled with the sound of her secret passion finally revealed. Her eyes were closed, her mind lost in the music. She didn't see the wide eyes, the dropped jaws, the whispered astonishment. She only knew the music, only knew the joy of letting it flow freely. She had always imagined this moment, but living it was far more incredible than she had dreamed. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as a simple waitress, not as a background figure in someone else's story, but as someone who could create something beautiful, someone who could touch hearts with her music. The melody grew, filling every corner of the cafe, moving through the room like a gentle wave, leaving a quiet awe in its wake. And as the last note lingered in the air, the cafe remained silent for a long moment. No one moved. No one spoke. The ordinary world had stopped, held in the spell of her music. Then, slowly, a single clap broke the silence, followed by another and another, until the room was filled with applause. People were on their feet, cheering, smiling, and shaking their heads in disbelief. She opened her eyes, surprised to see the faces of the customers, not polite or indifferent, but amazed, glowing with admiration. The manager smiled proudly, and her coworkers looked at her with new respect, some with tears in their eyes. She felt a warmth she had never known, a sense of belonging, a feeling that her life, small and ordinary though it had seemed, had led her to this moment of extraordinary beauty, and in that moment, she realized something important. She was more than what people saw at first glance. She was more than a waitress. She was an artist, a dreamer, a creator of beauty, and perhaps, just perhaps, this was only the beginning. The day passed slowly, every hour stretching longer than the one before. The memory of the manager's words, "Maybe you could play tonight," kept echoing in her mind. She tried to focus on her work, taking orders, serving coffee, wiping tables, but her thoughts kept drifting to the piano in the corner of the cafe. What if she couldn't play well in front of people? What if her hands trembled and the notes came out wrong? She had played in her apartment, where no one could hear her mistakes, but this was different. This was real. People would be watching her. People would be judging. She wiped the table and forced herself to smile at a customer, but inside she felt a storm of anxiety and excitement. She had always dreamed of sharing her music, but the dream had always stayed in the safety of her apartment. Now it was no longer just a dream, it was about to happen. She could almost feel the weight of the piano keys under her fingers, the sound of the first note vibrating through the room, and the faces of people turning toward her in surprise. Her heart beat faster. The staff tried to help her. One coworker leaned over and whispered, "You can do it. Just think about the music, not the people. It's what you love, right?" Another offered a shy smile. "We believe in you. You've got this." Their words were kind, but they did not erase the fear. She nodded, thanking them softly, but her mind still raced. Hours passed, and the cafe slowly filled with customers. Some came out of curiosity, hoping to hear the promised music. Others came to enjoy their usual evening coffee, unaware that something extraordinary was about to happen. The chatter of the cafe rose and fell, cups clinked on saucers, and the aroma of coffee and pastries filled the air. She moved among the tables, serving people with her usual quiet efficiency, but every movement was shadowed by her nerves. Finally, the manager approached her again, his expression gentle but firm. "It's almost time," he said. "Are you ready?" She swallowed hard and nodded. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she had no choice now. She followed him to the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. The customers turned their heads to watch, curious about the woman who had been quietly serving them all day. Most had never noticed her before. To them, she was just a waitress, someone ordinary, someone whose presence barely registered. They could not have guessed that the person walking toward the piano carried a hidden world of music inside her. She sat down on the piano bench, her fingers hovering above the keys. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the whirlwind inside her. She remembered the hours she had spent in her small apartment, playing for no one, letting the music flow from her heart. She remembered the way her grandmother had smiled when she first learned a simple melody, the way her hands had trembled with excitement. That memory gave her a little courage. The first notes she played were soft and hesitant, almost shy. The cafe was filled with a gentle melody that seemed to float in the air. People paused in their conversations, turning their heads, listening. The music was delicate at first, almost fragile, but there was a quiet power in it, a sense that it had something important to say. She felt her confidence growing with each note, her fingers moving more freely, her heart opening to the sound. At first, some customers looked surprised, unsure of what to expect. They had come for coffee and a quiet evening, not expecting a performance from the woman who had been serving them. But slowly the music began to capture their attention. The gentle melody wove around the room, reaching every corner, touching hearts in ways that words could not. People stopped talking. People put down their cups. They listened. She began to play with more confidence now, letting her emotions guide her fingers. She played not just with her hands, but with her whole being. The music carried her joy, her dreams, her fears, and her longing. Each note seemed to tell a story of someone who had lived in quiet invisibility, someone whose heart had been filled with music all along. She had never realized how powerful it could feel to share her gift with others. The customers began to change as well. Their faces softened, their eyes widened, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. Some whispered to each other, unable to hide their surprise. "Who knew she could play like that?" One said softly. "She's incredible," another whispered. The cafe, once ordinary, had become a place of magic. The music created a bridge between her and the people around her, a connection that had never existed before. Even her coworkers watched in amazement. They had always seen her as quiet and ordinary, someone who did her job without making a fuss. But now, they saw a different side of her, a side full of talent, passion, and courage. They could see the joy in her expression, the way her body moved with the rhythm, the way the music seemed to flow naturally from her soul. It was as if they had been blind all along, unable to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. The manager stood nearby, pride shining in his eyes. He had always known she had talent, had seen her hum little tunes while cleaning the tables, had noticed her fingers tapping invisible keys as she worked. But even he had not expected this. The performance was more than just music, it was a revelation. It showed what she was capable of, what had been hidden inside her for so long. She played for what felt like hours, though it was only a short time. The melody grew richer, more complex, more confident. The music was no longer timid, it was alive, powerful, and full of emotion. The customers were completely absorbed, some closing their eyes to better feel the music, others sitting forward in their chairs, hanging on every note. They had come expecting something simple, a small performance to accompany their evening coffee, but instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the piece came to an end. The last note lingered in the air, trembling softly as if reluctant to leave. For a long moment there was silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The room seemed to hold its breath, suspended in the beauty of what had just happened. Then slowly a single clap broke the silence, followed by another and another, until the entire cafe was filled with applause. She opened her eyes, startled by the sound. She had been lost in the music, unaware of how the audience had reacted. Now she saw their faces, filled with admiration, surprise, and joy. They were no longer just customers, they were witnesses to something rare and beautiful, something that had been hidden in plain sight all along. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had never known before. She felt proud, not just of her music, but of herself. She had stepped out of the shadows and shown the world a part of herself she had always kept hidden. The manager came forward, smiling broadly. "That was amazing," he said. "I knew you could do it, but I didn't know it would be this incredible." Her coworkers surrounded her, congratulating her, some with tears in their eyes. For the first time she felt truly seen. Not just as a waitress, not just as a quiet presence in the cafe, but as someone capable of creating something beautiful and powerful. As the customers continued to applaud, she realized that her life had changed in that single moment. Something ordinary had become extraordinary. Something hidden had been revealed. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning. She had always dreamed of sharing her music, but now she had done it. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, faced her fear, and shown the world who she really was. After the applause settled, people came forward to speak to her. Some asked if she had performed in concerts before, some wanted to know if she could play for special events, and others simply wanted to tell her how much they had enjoyed the music. She smiled shyly, answering politely, but inside she felt a mixture of excitement and disbelief. She had never imagined that anyone outside her apartment would hear her play, let alone be so moved by it. That night, after the cafe had emptied and the dishes were washed, she returned to her apartment, her heart still racing. She sat at her piano, as she always did, but tonight was different. Tonight she did not play just for herself. She played for the people who had listened, for the faces filled with awe, for the hands that had clapped in appreciation. She played with a new sense of confidence, knowing that her music could reach beyond the walls of her apartment and touch the hearts of strangers, and as she played, she realized something important. Her life as a simple waitress had not ended. It had transformed. She could still serve coffee, still wipe tables, still smile politely at strangers. But now, she was also someone who had a voice, someone who had a gift that could inspire, move, and change people. She was no longer invisible. She was a musician, a performer, a dreamer who had finally dared to share her dreams. That night, she fell asleep with a smile on her face, the echo of the piano still ringing in her ears. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and discovered that the world was bigger, brighter, and more full of possibilities than she had ever imagined. And deep down, she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. The moment she pressed the first key, the cafe seemed to change. The ordinary chatter and the clinking of cups faded into silence. People turned their heads, curious at first, then slowly captivated as the gentle melody began to float through the air. It was soft, delicate, almost shy, yet it held a warmth that reached everyone present. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move, not thinking, not planning, just letting the music flow from her heart. At first, she was nervous. Her hands trembled slightly and the notes came out slower than usual. She felt the weight of the audience's gaze on her, their unspoken expectations pressing down. She could almost feel them thinking, "Who is this simple waitress, and can she really play?" For a brief moment, fear gripped her. She wanted to stop, to hide behind the safety of her apron and the familiar routine of serving coffee. But then she remembered the quiet evenings at home, playing her piano alone, the freedom she felt when no one was watching, the joy of letting her emotions pour out through each note. She drew in a deep breath and let herself trust the music. As she continued, the melody grew stronger, more confident. Her fingers moved with a surprising agility, dancing across the keys with precision and emotion. The cafe, once ordinary and quiet, now felt alive. Each note told a story of longing, of hope, of dreams hidden away for years. The customers' faces shifted from polite curiosity to wonder. Some leaned forward, their eyes wide with amazement, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Others sat back, mesmerized, letting the music wash over them like a gentle wave. Her coworkers watched in disbelief. They had always known her as quiet, hardworking, and unassuming. They had seen her hum little tunes while cleaning tables, but no one had ever imagined this. The woman who served coffee with a soft smile was now creating beauty that filled the entire room. Some exchanged astonished glances. "I had no idea she could do this," whispered one. Another simply shook their head, unable to speak. Caught up in the magic of the performance, the manager stood nearby, pride shining in his eyes. He had always suspected she had a talent, noticed her tapping out melodies while working, but even he was overwhelmed by the depth of her skill. He watched her hands move gracefully over the keys, watched her expression transform from nervousness to pure joy, and knew that this was a moment that would be remembered long after the cafe returned to its usual routine. The melody shifted, becoming more complex, more intricate. She played faster, her fingers flying across the keys with ease and precision. The music now carried a sense of urgency and excitement, drawing everyone in. Some customers closed their eyes, letting themselves be transported by the sound, while others watched in awe, unable to look away. The cafe had become a concert hall, the ordinary walls and tables transformed by the power of her music. She had never imagined that her talent could have such an effect on people. She felt the energy of the audience, their amazement and appreciation, and it fueled her even more. Each note was infused with her emotions, her years of hard work, her hidden dreams, her quiet longing to be seen. She realized that the music was no longer just for herself. It was for everyone listening, everyone who had come to the cafe expecting nothing more than coffee and conversation. A few customers whispered to each other, unable to contain their surprise. "She's incredible," one said softly. "I never thought a waitress could play like that," another whispered. The words barely reached her ears, but she felt their truth. She was no longer invisible. She was making a mark, leaving an impression on everyone in the room. The piano responded to her emotions, each key resonating with the intensity of her feelings. She felt a connection to the music she had never felt before. It was as if the piano itself understood her, as if it were alive, guiding her fingers, lifting her confidence, and amplifying her emotions. She was no longer afraid. She was free. As the piece progressed, she began to experiment with the tempo and dynamics, adding subtle flourishes that showcased not just technical skill, but artistry. She played with a sensitivity that made every note meaningful. Some customers had tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty and emotion of her performance. Others simply sat in stunned silence, unable to find words that could match what they were hearing. Her coworkers were speechless. They had worked alongside her for years, never noticing the depth of her talent. Now they watched in awe as she transformed from an ordinary waitress into an extraordinary musician. The realization settled in. Talent like this had been hiding in plain sight all along. They felt proud, amazed, And a little guilty for never recognizing it sooner, the manager finally spoke, quietly to himself but with a tone of reverence. She's amazing. Absolutely amazing. He felt a sense of pride for the cafe as well, knowing that it had become the place where such an incredible moment could happen. This wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation, a reminder that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The music began to reach its climax, the notes faster, stronger, and more commanding. She felt herself carried by the rhythm, her fingers moving almost instinctively, guided by years of secret practice and passion. Her nerves were gone, replaced by a sense of joy and fulfillment that she had never experienced. She realized that the fear she had felt earlier was just a barrier she had been waiting to overcome. Now she had broken through, every eye in the cafe was on her. The ordinary customers who had walked in expecting nothing more than a quiet evening were now witnesses to something extraordinary. Some were clapping softly along with the rhythm, others held their breath, not wanting to interrupt the magic. The energy in the room was electric, charged with wonder and appreciation for her talent. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had never played for an audience like this before, and the effect was overwhelming. Her music was no longer just notes on a page, it was a story, a journey, a bridge between her and the people who had never noticed her before. She realized that this was more than just a performance. It was a moment of connection, a chance to share a piece of her soul with the world. As the final notes echoed through the cafe, there was a moment of silence. The music hung in the air, delicate and fragile, before the room erupted in applause. The sound was thunderous, filling every corner of the space, and she felt herself smile, shy but proud. She had done it. She had faced her fear, shared her talent, and touched the hearts of everyone around her. Customers stood, clapping and cheering, some even whistling in amazement. The manager came forward, his eyes shining with pride and admiration. "That was incredible," he said. "Absolutely incredible." Her co-workers surrounded her, congratulating her, smiling, some with tears in their eyes. For the first time, she felt truly recognized, not as a waitress, but as someone capable of something extraordinary. People approached her, asking if she had performed elsewhere, wanting to know if she could play at other events, expressing their awe and appreciation. She smiled, feeling a mix of joy and disbelief. She had never imagined that anyone outside her apartment would hear her play, let alone be so moved. Every word of praise, every expression of admiration, made her feel alive in a way she had never experienced before. After the applause settled, she returned to her seat at the piano, taking a deep breath. She realized that her life had changed in that single moment. Something ordinary had become extraordinary. Something hidden had been revealed. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning. She had always dreamed of sharing her music, but now she had done it. She had stepped out of the shadows, faced her fear, and shown the world who she really was. The cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the chatter and clinking of cups resuming, but something had shifted. The people who had been present would not forget this night. They had seen something rare and beautiful, and they had been moved by it. She had left a mark, and she knew it. That night she went home with her heart full, her mind racing with possibilities. She sat at her own piano, playing softly, letting the music wash over her once more. She was no longer just a waitress who played in secret. She was a musician, a performer, someone who had dared to share her gift. And she knew that this night was only the start of a journey that would take her far beyond the small cafe where it had all begun. She fell asleep that night with a sense of hope and excitement she had never known before. The music lingered in her mind, a promise of what was to come. She had discovered the power of stepping into the light, of daring to be seen, and of sharing her heart with the world. And she knew, deep down, that her life would never be the same again. The next morning she arrived at the cafe feeling both nervous and excited. The memory of last night's performance still lingered in her mind, like a soft echo of a dream she didn't want to wake up from. She had never expected such a reaction. Never imagined that so many people could be moved by the music she played. The applause, the wide eyes, the whispered words of admiration, all of it felt almost unreal. And yet, it was real. As she moved through her usual routine, something felt different. Customers who had been present the night before approached her with smiles and kind words. "You were amazing last night," one said. "I've never heard anything like that," another added. They spoke with genuine awe, their eyes shining with respect. She smiled politely, thanking them, but inside she felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. For the first time, she realized that people could see her for more than the simple waitress she had always been. Her coworkers were buzzing with excitement. They talked in hushed voices about the performance, replaying every moment in their minds. The manager approached her, a broad smile on his face. "People are still talking about you," he said. "I've had calls from some local music enthusiasts who want to hear you play again. And there's even someone from a nearby studio who wants to meet you." Her heart raced. She had never considered that her music could reach beyond the cafe. She had always played in secret, content to let her talent exist quietly, unnoticed. Now the world was opening up to her, and the possibilities seemed endless. At the same time, a wave of anxiety washed over her. Could she handle the attention? Could she play under pressure? Could she meet the expectations of people who had never known her ordinary life? The morning passed in a blur. She served coffee and pastries, but her mind was elsewhere, thinking about what the future might hold. By the afternoon, her phone began to ring more frequently than usual. Messages from people who had been at the cafe the night before filled her inbox. Some wanted to invite her to play at small gatherings. Others suggested music lessons or collaborations. She read each message carefully, feeling a mix of excitement, nervousness, and disbelief. Could this really be happening to her? Word began to spread beyond the cafe. A local news outlet called, wanting to feature the story of the waitress who had stunned everyone with her piano performance. A few people from nearby music schools visited the cafe, curious to see her play in person. The once ordinary cafe had become a small hub of excitement, and she was at the center of it all. She felt overwhelmed, but also deeply grateful. For the first time, it seemed that her hidden talent was being recognized for what it truly was. That evening, after the cafe had closed, she sat at the piano in her apartment, replaying the events of the day in her mind. She thought about the people who had listened, the faces filled with awe, the words of encouragement, and the invitations to perform again. She realized that her life had shifted. She was no longer invisible, no longer just a waitress. She was someone who could inspire, someone who could touch the hearts of others through her music. Despite the excitement, she remained humble. She knew that talent alone was not enough. She had to continue practicing, improving, and growing. The applause and admiration were wonderful, but they could not replace the dedication and effort required to truly become a musician. She sat at the piano, playing softly, focusing on her technique, her expression, and the emotions she wanted to convey. Every note was a reminder of why she had started playing in the first place, the love of music, the joy of creating, and the desire to share that joy with others. Over the next few weeks, her life began to change in small but significant ways. She continued working at the cafe, but now she had a new sense of purpose. Each day brought opportunities to perform, meet people who appreciated her talent, and learn from those who had more experience. The invitations grew more frequent, some leading to small local events, others to music workshops and gatherings. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness every time she stepped onto a stage or played in front of a new audience. But the joy of sharing her music always outweighed the fear. Her family and close friends were proud, though a little surprised by the sudden attention. They had always known that she was talented, but seeing the world recognize it was something entirely different. They encouraged her, reminding her to stay grounded, to continue practicing, and to enjoy every moment. Their support was a comfort, helping her navigate the sudden changes in her life while keeping her connected to the person she had always been. One afternoon, she received an invitation to perform at a small community concert. It was not a large stage, not a grand hall, but it was an opportunity to reach new people, to share her music with those who had never heard her before. She felt a flutter of nervousness, but also a deep excitement. She prepared carefully, practicing the pieces she would play, refining her technique, and imagining the faces of the audience as she performed. The day of the concert arrived, and she walked onto the small stage with a mix of anxiety and determination. The audience was quiet, watching her with curiosity. She took a deep breath, sat at the piano, and let the music flow. The first notes were soft, tentative, but as she played, her confidence grew. She moved with ease, her fingers dancing across the keys, her emotions pouring into every note. The audience was captivated, drawn into the beauty and power of her music. When she finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. People stood, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. She felt a wave of pride and gratitude, knowing that her music had touched them, had reached into their hearts, and had left a lasting impression. For the first time, she understood the true power of her talent, not just to impress, but to connect, to inspire, and to bring joy to others. As the weeks passed, she continued to perform at small events, each one helping her grow more confident and skilled. She began to see a future that she had never imagined, a life where her music could be more than a secret, a life where she could inspire and move people through the piano. She remained humble, remembering the quiet nights at home when she played for herself, and she used that grounding to stay focused and dedicated. Her life had changed, but she stayed connected to the cafe and the people who had known her before the music became public. She continued to work there, not because she needed to, but because she loved it. The cafe had been the place where her talent was first recognized, and she wanted to honor that. Serving coffee, interacting with regular customers, and maintaining her familiar routines kept her grounded. Even as her world expanded, the recognition and opportunities also brought challenges. She faced moments of doubt, times when the pressure to perform felt overwhelming, and instances when she questioned whether she was ready for the attention. But each time she returned to the piano, to the music that had always been her refuge. Playing reminded her why she had started, why she had worked so hard, and why she had to keep going. It gave her the courage to face the challenges and the strength to embrace the opportunities. Through it all, she learned something important. Talent alone was not enough. It required courage, dedication, and a willingness to take risks. She had to step out of the shadows, confront her fears, and trust herself. And now that the world had opened up to her in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a musician, a performer, someone whose music could touch hearts and change lives. And as she sat at her piano each evening, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, she knew that this was only the beginning. There were still countless stages to play on, countless people to inspire, and countless pieces of music to explore. Her life had transformed from ordinary to extraordinary, and she embraced the future with hope, determination, and a deep love for the music that had always been her true self. Her life had changed in ways she had never imagined. The small cafe where she had spent years quietly serving coffee had become the starting point of something extraordinary. Word of her talent had spread, and people from all around came to hear the waitress who could play the piano like a seasoned musician. She still worked at the cafe sometimes, but her life was no longer ordinary. She had discovered a new path, one filled with possibilities she had only dreamed of. Despite the growing attention, she remained humble. She remembered the nights alone at her piano in her tiny apartment, the moments when no one was listening, when the music was just for her. Those quiet hours had built the foundation for everything she was now experiencing. She realized that talent alone was not enough. It was patience, practice, and love for her craft that had brought her this far. She sat at her piano each evening, refining her skills, exploring new melodies, and pouring her heart into every note. She began receiving invitations to perform at larger events, local festivals, community concerts, and even small television segments. Every opportunity made her nervous, but she welcomed the challenge. She knew that each performance was a chance not just to show her talent, but to connect with people, to move them with music, to inspire them with the story of someone who had quietly carried her dreams for years. The nerves never completely went away, but they became a companion. a reminder that she was stepping out of her comfort zone and into something bigger. One day, she was invited to perform at a prestigious music event in the city. The thought of standing on a stage filled with accomplished musicians and a large audience both thrilled and terrified her. She spent weeks preparing, practicing late into the night, perfecting every note, imagining how the audience would react. When the day arrived, she walked onto the stage with her heart pounding. The bright lights, the large crowd, the expectation, it could have been overwhelming. But she remembered all the small steps that had led her here. The countless hours at her piano, the courage to play in front of the first audience at the cafe. And she took a deep breath. The first notes of her performance were soft, hesitant, but full of emotion. Gradually her confidence grew. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, each note carrying the depth of her passion and the story of her journey. The audience was captivated. People leaned forward, their eyes wide, some with tears streaming down their faces. The music was no longer just sound. It was a bridge between her and the hearts of everyone listening. After the performance, the applause was overwhelming. She stood, bowing shyly, feeling both proud and amazed. The recognition she had once feared now felt like a warm embrace. People came forward, offering praise, shaking her hand, thanking her for sharing something so beautiful. She realized that her music had a power she had never imagined, a power to move, to inspire, and to create connections that went beyond words. With time, she began to travel, performing in different cities and meeting musicians who encouraged and inspired her. She learned new techniques, explored different styles, and grew not only as a pianist but as a person. Each performance was a lesson, each audience a new experience. She discovered that the joy of music was not just in playing but in sharing, in touching the hearts of others, and in inspiring people to believe in their own hidden talents. Through it all, she stayed connected to her roots. She never forgot the cafe where it had all begun, the small apartment where she had practiced in secret, and the quiet nights when her music belonged only to her. She returned there whenever she could, playing for the customers who had first believed in her, sharing her journey and her music with the people who had supported her from the start. The cafe remained a symbol of humility and beginnings, a reminder that extraordinary things could come from the most ordinary places. Her story began to inspire others. Young musicians, hidden talents, and people who had long given up on their dreams reached out to her. They wanted guidance, encouragement, and a reminder that talent could be nurtured and shared. No matter how ordinary their lives seemed, she took this responsibility seriously, mentoring and supporting those who were willing to take the first step, helping them find the courage she had found in herself. Despite her growing fame and busy schedule, she never lost the love for music that had started it all. She played for joy, for expression, and for connection. Each note was a reflection of her heart, each melody a story of perseverance, courage, and discovery. She realized that music was not just a career. It was a gift, a way to touch the world, and a reminder that beauty could emerge from the most unexpected places. One evening, after a long day of travel and performance, she returned to her apartment and sat at her old piano. She ran her fingers across the keys, feeling the familiar texture, the warmth of the instrument that had been with her through so many moments. She played a simple melody, one she had composed years ago in secret, and felt a wave of nostalgia and gratitude. Her journey had been long, challenging, and at times frightening, but it had led her to a life richer than she could have imagined. As she played, she thought about the young woman she had once been, the quiet waitress who had worked tirelessly, who had dreamed in secret, and who had hesitated to share her gift with the world. She smiled softly, realizing that the courage to take that first step had changed everything. She had transformed her life not by seeking attention or fame, but by daring to follow her heart and trust in her talent. Her story became a beacon of hope. People told her that they had been inspired to pursue their own passions, to overcome fear, and to share their hidden talents with the world. She had discovered something profound. When someone dares to reveal their true self, they can change not only their own life, but also the lives of those around them. The impact of her courage and talent rippled outward, touching hearts in ways she had never anticipated. Years passed, and she continued to grow as a musician and as a person. She performed in grand halls, small gatherings, and intimate cafes, always remembering the journey that had brought her there. She remained humble, grounded, and grateful, knowing that her success was built not just on talent but on persistence, courage, and a love for the music that had always been her guide. She also realized that life was no longer defined by the ordinary routines she had once accepted. Her days were filled with creativity, connection, and purpose. She had become more than she had ever imagined, a musician, an inspiration, and a living example of what happens when one dares to step into the light and share their gift with the world. And in quiet moments, when the world was still and she was alone at her piano, she would play for herself, just as she had in the beginning. Those moments reminded her of the joy, the freedom, and the beauty of music. They reminded her that no matter how far she traveled, how many stages she performed on, or how many people admired her, the music was hers. And it always would be. In the end, she had learned that extraordinary things could emerge from ordinary lives, that courage, passion, and dedication could transform even the quietest, simplest moments into something unforgettable, that one person with a heart full of dreams and the courage to share them could touch countless others in ways they never expected. And so, the waitress who had once served coffee quietly, who had thought her life would remain ordinary forever, had become something much greater. She had become a symbol of hope, a source of inspiration, and a living proof that talent, when nurtured and shared, could change everything. She continued to play, to teach, to inspire, and to live her life with the same quiet determination and love for music that had carried her from the small cafe to stages she had once only dreamed of. Her story was a reminder to everyone. Never underestimate the hidden potential within an ordinary life. Sometimes the most beautiful things are discovered in the most unexpected places. And when one dares to take the first step, to trust their talent and to share their gift, the world can be transformed in ways that are beyond imagination.